Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about how to strategize for success. We're going to go over a little bit of the introduction to that, the primary goal for this evening, a couple timelines that I want you to be aware of, some things to know before you go perhaps to any recruiting events, and then we're going to tie it all together. Okay, so for many of you, the vast majority, you are looking to apply or have already started the application process for the fall of 2025. So my comment tonight are going to be somewhat both in general as well as Southwestern specific. So I want to try to, offer up any bits of advice that I can give, regardless of the schools that you're considering. But of course, being that we are here from Southwestern, we're going to have some particular information that will pertain to, our process and timelines. So one of the things that's important to remember is that you're going to interact, hopefully, with many different constituents from each of the law schools that you are considering. If you're going to some of the events, such as forums, we've already had the big LSAC LA forum in LA already. New York was just this past weekend, but of course there are other locations as well that are coming up. Houston's coming up, Boston's coming up. We will have representatives there at each of those forums, but there's also going to be grad fairs and there's going to be law fairs. There's going to be fairs that each law school themselves will host. So for example, coming up on November 2nd, Southwestern will host our Southwestern Law Day for prospective students. So you're going to have an opportunity to interact with both members of the admissions office, faculty members, current students, perhaps alumni, many different people. And it's important that as you are approaching, this season, if you will, taking this next step towards your future career as attorneys, that you are, walking the line very carefully between finding schools that are going to be the right fit for you and your goals and where you see yourself being a part of their community, but you also want the schools to be able to see you as part of their community. So hopefully after tonight, you'll have a little bit better of an idea, about how you can maybe approach some of those things. There is, a lot of advice out there about starting the application process early, getting your applications in early, right? But early is kind of relative. So I want you to, approach this process with confidence, but I also want you to approach it with a little bit of, trepidation, meaning I want you to be a little nervous in this, so that you don't just kind of plow into it and not give every single piece of this application process your full attention. Every single little bit that you craft and put together really is a reflection of your judgment and what you've deemed is the best representation of yourself for the law school admissions committees to consider your candidacy. For many of you, this goal of going to law school has, maybe been a long time coming. Maybe for some of you, this is kind of a recent spark. But regardless of where you are kind of on that pathway, you are preparing for a career, not just, a fly-by-night job that you're going to just, toss away after 6 months if you don't like it. So you really want to make sure that you're putting in the time and the effort to get the outcomes that you want out of this at the end. Okay, so the goal for tonight is to find the best strategy or strategies that are going to work best for you. And, we have a number of you, almost 100 participating tonight. I can all but guarantee there's 100 different priorities, 100 different goals, 100 different visions for how you want to be a law student and the different things that you're going to be prioritizing. So it's important that you really figure out what it means for yourselves as individuals. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of guidance, if you will. I would take a lot of it, most of it, with a grain of salt. Just remember that every action or inaction should be intentional and should ultimately leave the law school with a favorable impression. Okay. Okay, so here are two different timelines. Along the top, you'll see the fall, winter, spring, and summer seasons. And what we've done here is just kind of outline for you so you can kind of see what is happening outside of your own application, right? So here in the fall, this is the primary recruitment season. And this is also when most of the prospective student events occur. Case in point, here you are tonight. As we transition into winter, you're going to see we carry forward recruitment and prospect events. And now we've picked up file review, and we've picked up decisions, and we've picked up waiting list. Waiting list arguably is a form of decision, but it's not a final decision. As we get into the spring, we're going to carry forward all the things from the fall and the winter. You can see here, right, the theme. This is cumulative. And now we're going to be adding some other thing to it. We're going to be adding admitted student events, and we're going to be adding deposits. And then as we round out the cycle and we get into the summer, all of those things are going to carry forward, probably less prospect events, but there may be some prospect events for the next cycle. So I know we had some 2026 or 2027 folks here. This summer is when you can start to expect to see some of those first prospective student events for those next cycles. Typically, there's a forum in DC, usually in July, and Southwestern is part of the West Coast Consortium. We usually do a Southern California event in July. So there's a few opportunities there to kind of kickstart it, but it's not really, the season for it until you get to the fall. But also in the summer, you're going to have prep programs. So Southwestern in particular does offer programs for our admitted students. So these may be things that you want to kind of look forward to. The application process for them varies depending on the program itself. We offer two. One that you actually have to apply for, and there is a cost, and that's our introduction to legal writing class. It's about 2 weeks, and it's every summer, and it's wildly popular. And there's limited enrollment for that. There's usually an in-person and a Zoom session, but not sure yet what next summer is going to bring. That's what it's been. And then we also offer a program for every incoming student that's free of charge, and that's called our Bison Boot Camp. Or if you are part of our online program, there's a sort of tangential program that we offer to the online students called Bison Essentials. So those programs both, are aimed to help give students that extra boost of confidence. Now, the intro to legal writing, that's a little bit more specific to those who really want to kind of like focus on that particular skill set. Maybe somebody who is a little bit more intimidated about, perhaps returning to school if it's been a little while, or somebody who really just understands how important legal writing is going to be to the future of your career. So those are two opportunities. Other law schools are going to have their own versions, perhaps, of their summer prep programs. So you can be on the lookout for those. But typically, these are going to be for students enrolling in our programs that particular year, meaning you can't do Southwestern's Bison Boot Camp and then attend another law school. Okay, so the bottom timelines, this is really kind of, we broke it up into 3 categories: before you're applying, after you're applying, and after you've received decisions. So before applying, and I know that includes many of you are in some state of this process right now. Hopefully you're researching schools. While you're researching your schools, I hope you do keep a spreadsheet. That's always something that I advise, where you can really keep track of all the specificity that's going to be required. This will be any of the deadlines for the application, any of the requirements versus things that are optional. You can perhaps even keep track of if there's a particular prompt, like say for the personal statement or not. What are the letter of recommendations requirements? What are the maximum letters that somebody can submit, etc. I hope you craft something of that nature. That's really for your benefit, but it will also help you as you are moving through these various stages, because you can keep track of other things after you've applied, as well as after you receive some decisions. Preparing your materials. So our next session on November 13th, we're going to go really through behind the scenes of real applications, and you can kind of get a better sense of what some of the content looks like. It's still going to be kind of with a 10,000 foot overview, but it'll give you a little bit more kind of window into it. But regardless, as you're preparing your materials, now this is perhaps the most challenging part. You're going to have to really figure out what it is about yourself and your candidacy that you feel is the most important. So we'll go into that a little bit on the next slide, but You're going to have to figure out what it is and where it needs to go in the application. And you want to make sure that in terms of the tone of your application and, the grammar and all of the things that are within your control, that it's basically perfect. There's no reason for anyone to submit a law school application that has errors. You have the time, you have the opportunity. Please, going back to what I was saying about not rushing, it's really important. This is a professional portfolio of information that you're putting together for yourself to enter a professional school, to get a professional license. And, arguably, you could say this is kind of like your first, sort of legal document that you've put together. Now, I know some of you may be paralegals or have worked in law offices. But if you'll indulge me, think of this kind of as your first attempt. But also it's really setting a tone for who you are in this journey and how you want to be perceived. Do you want to be perceived by those reading your file as somebody who's taken this process really seriously and put some time and effort into it? Or do you want to be perceived as somebody who, just was careless and sloppy and didn't seem to, want to put in that extra effort? I also want to make sure you are budgeting for all the costs associated with applying to law school. So at Southwestern, we do have an application fee of $60, but we're also very generous with our application fee waivers. So you can email the admissions office at admissions@swlaw.edu. And Walker, if you could put that in the chat, please. Then you can request an application fee waiver. So they're good for the cycle that you're in. So for our 2025 folks, we're happy to give you a fee waiver. If you're 26 or 27 or beyond, please just ask us for the cycle when we're in the cycle that you're applying. If you've come to any of our events or if you've been at any tables when we have been at events, you might have picked up a card with a fee waiver code. That's the same thing. So you can use that as well. Just note that those hard copy ones we gave out do have an expiration date on it. So if the time has lapsed and you haven't had a chance to use it, just contact the admissions office and we'll give you a new code. You also need to obviously, prepare for the cost of the LSAT if you're going to be paying for things like score preview. I know many of you were retaking the test or had a plan to take one in the future. Are you only studying for it yourself, or are you also paying for a commercial LSAT prep? Those are things to budget. And then after decisions have come out, if you are admitted, you should be prepared to pay at least one, but oftentimes multiple seat deposits. If you've been admitted to more than one school, you might have multiple seat deposits that you want to pay so that you can essentially hold your seat in that respective school's program while you're continuing to decide. So seat deposits can be perhaps as low as a couple $100s to as high as, $1,000 or more dollars. They are typically not anything that can be waived. They are not things that you can use future financial aid at the law school to cover. So again, this goes back into preparing yourselves so that you can, take the next steps if and when those come. So after you've applied, you can still participate and engage with the law schools. Attend our events. So, I'm assuming we have some people here tonight who have already applied, and great, happy to have you here. Hopefully you can continue to get benefit out of the events, but the events will change and they will evolve and there will be, different programs. So please continue to still engage with the law schools. Continue to do your research. It doesn't just stop at the point when you've submitted your application. There's always more information for you to learn. There's always more information to help you in your, kind of overall vision, if you will, about what kind of law school is going to be the right fit for you. So go back to that spreadsheet that I was talking about and continue to look for perhaps some gaps, or perhaps look for information or opportunities where you can continue to evaluate the school for its fit for yourself. That might mean taking a tour. That might mean sitting in on a class. That might mean asking to speak to a current student. Any of those types of things, you can certainly ask the admissions offices for any assistance to do. Submit your FAFSA. So if any of you, and I would expect most of you, are interested in having some financial aid, now I'm not talking about scholarships, but aside from scholarships, which are typically merit-based, If you're interested in having any kind of assistance in the form of student loans, then you're going to need to submit the FAFSA. Now, some law schools may have additional applications for you to submit, so pay attention to those requirements. But while you're waiting, you can certainly submit the FAFSA. Now, it hasn't opened yet for this 2025 cycle. Hopefully, it will be opening by December. Last year, there were some pretty significant delays. I have no idea if that will repeat itself or not, but whenever the FAFSA does become available, just be ready for it. The other bit of advice that I can give to you is to make sure that when you are going through the FAFSA and you're entering your information, make sure it's as accurate as possible. One of the hiccups last year was it was very challenging for people to go back in and make corrections. So try to do it all in one go. And then make sure your information, your contact information is current with the admissions office. So if you update your email address or your mailing address or your phone number, any of those types of things, please make sure you are updating the law school so that we can update your information should we need to reach you. At Southwestern, all of our decisions are sent via email. So it is important that we do have the right email address for you. It is also important that our email doesn't land in your spam or junk folders. Okay, so after decisions. So decisions can be either waitlist, which really just kind of means they've kind of made a soft decision on your file, that there's some potential promise that they see there, but perhaps they are waiting to make a final decision depending on maybe when you applied, maybe based on the volume of the schools, received applications for that year, or, whatever the circumstances may be, but it does mean they're still considering. Look to see if there are some next steps. Now at Southwestern, for most of our candidates who are put on the waiting list, if this is done early enough, we do also have waitlist interviews. So that is something that you could anticipate. Now, if you're waitlisted towards the end of the cycle, we will not be doing waitlist interviews at that time. That's really just a function of how much time is left and the turnaround time that the interviews would normally entail. But if you happen to be waitlisted earlier, most likely you'll see something about a waitlist interview as an option. If it's presented, I highly do recommend that you proceed with one. Now, if you are admitted, then that's wonderful. And hopefully you'll garner multiple different admissions offers. And then, arguably the real hard part begins, and that's making a choice. So if you've done a lot of research and you really put time and effort into figuring out what law school and its respective programs may be a good fit for you, then it may be a pretty simple task, if you're presented with multiple offers for you to choose one. But if you haven't put in all the work first, then you're really going to need to dig deep at that point. Some of those deadlines can come around real quick, sometimes, with only maybe 1 or 2 weeks. And by deadlines, I mean seat deposit. And as you get admitted later and later in the cycle, sometimes the turnaround is literally the same day. So that is not the time to ask a school about their programs or what kind of things that they offer, right? You really should have done all of that legwork at the beginning so that if you are faced with something as stressful as a 24-hour or a 7-hour turnaround, that you can make that decision with some amount of confidence. Now, if you are denied, and perhaps maybe even denied at all of the schools that you've applied for, I really, as much as I know that can be very heartbreaking and discouraging, I really hope that doesn't derail you. So I would just ask you to kind of go back to your goals. Why are you doing this? And what are your goals? If your goal is to go to law school, then you can probably double back and figure out perhaps some different avenues to pursue it, maybe a different set of schools to apply to, maybe retaking the LSAT if that's not something you had done yet, maybe casting a wider net for schools, etc. If you're not getting into just maybe the 1 or 2 schools that you've kind of deemed as your first choice, but you do have some other offers, then you're going to have to really kind of sit with that and ask yourself, do you want to gamble away the chance to go to a school that has made you an offer, or do you want to turn them down and then reapply for the schools that may be your top choice? There is no right or wrong. I couldn't tell you which one is the best thing for you to do. Only you know what the best thing for you to do is. But I would just encourage you, if you are going to do that, if you are going to pass up the opportunity and wait another cycle, really try to think about what you could do differently than if you want a different outcome. Perhaps it is the timing of when you applied. Perhaps it is the materials that you applied with, those types of things. So no simple answers, but a lot of different potential there. Okay, so before you go to events, or even if you've already started and you plan to do more, I want you to think about, kind of the nature of the event. In most of these types of events, this is not really for you to give your life story. This isn't for you to give someone your resume. No one behind the table is looking to collect any information for any applicant to do anything with it. So that's really not the time or place. But be thinking about, how you want to interact with that particular school. Have some questions that you've already thought about in advance because you've done some research on the school. You have maybe some ideas that or some questions that you've already kind of formed for that particular school that you want to know something more about than what you were able to read on their website or in any of their materials. It's not an effective use of your time to come to a school, to meet with any representative from a school, regardless of the event, and say, well, just tell me something about your law school. That doesn't really demonstrate that you've put in any effort to learn some of that information yourself. So do some of the initial research before you are presented with the opportunity to ask questions. This may be your only opportunity to talk to somebody in person and ask questions. And so you don't want to kind of squander that. If you're going to be attending events that are in person and you are worried that perhaps you can't attend the entirety of the event, maybe you have to come late because of a work schedule, or maybe you have to leave early because of some other commitments, sometimes that's okay. But do check with the law school in advance, just to kind of get a sense of how late is too late, how early is too early. You don't want to kind of put yourself in a bad position by arriving really late and making yourself feel uncomfortable because perhaps you're arriving at an inopportune time. So just ask them, to get some more guidance about that. You could also ask about future events, and you can also ask about virtual events that may fit better into your schedule. Okay, and then in terms of, what communication or engagement strategy do you think would work for you and your schedule? It's really important, I think, for most of you to get a feel for the individual law schools. So going back to what I was saying previously, ask them about campus visits, ask them about opportunities. You don't have to just attend during an event. You can also set up typically private appointments. At least that's true for Southwestern. So that's also something you can ask for. Okay, your tips for successful strategy. We've got planning, phone calls, emails, preparing to launch, and launching. So in your planning phase, which might be most of you right now, I want you to think backwards to when you want to apply, and then give yourself as much lead time as possible. This is particularly important for your recommenders. If you have a goal of applying by the end of December, for example, you don't want to wait until December 1st to ask a recommender to write a letter on your behalf. You should be already asking them. So give them as much time as possible, typically about 6 to 8 weeks. You never know if somebody, might otherwise have written you a really strong letter, but they may have other obligations or work or life commitments that, have rendered it perhaps not feasible for them. For your phone calls. Now, we get a lot of phone calls in our office, quite a bit. And I want to urge all of you, regardless of where you are in the cycle, regardless of maybe how long you might have been waiting, about how anxious you might be, about how frustrated you might be, regardless of any of those things, I want you to remember that it is important that you treat everybody with kindness and professionalism and civility. That's important in your law school classrooms, and it's important as you are engaging with each individual admissions office. So, sometimes if you're really heated about something, it's probably not the best time to make a call. Also, we are often trying to call people and can't reach them. And that's because their voicemails are either not set up or they're full. So this is your reminder to make sure you clear those things out. Many law schools do not text. Some do. We currently do not. So if I try to call you and I can't reach you, and if I was trying to call you so I could offer you a seat in the class, I will move on to someone else. And something as simple as not having your voicemail cleared could have meant you missed out on the offer. So just be methodical about that. If your voicemail fills up, keep clearing it out. I already mentioned that emails are the primary communication method, so make sure that you stay on top of that. You should be expecting to hear from schools, especially after you've applied. So typically after you applied within a short period of time, we send an email to you with the link to check your status for the online status checker. So that's one of the ways that you can kind of monitor the progress of your application as you're waiting. In your preparing to launch phase, I talked about the spreadsheet already. Make sure you're keeping track of everything. Make sure that you've kept it all really organized. One thing that does sometimes happen and happens every year to a handful of people is that, again, they're in that kind of rush mode and they might submit documents with the wrong school's name on it. And that really is just a unacceptable mistake. So again, take the time to make sure you've reviewed everything before submitting. And then once you've launched, essentially meaning, right, you've submitted your application, hopefully you feel really good about everything that you've submitted. You can't go back to the law schools and say, oh, I just noticed this, error in my personal statement. Can you take that one out and put this new one in? It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So just make sure you're, feeling good about everything after you've already submitted. Okay, so in your planning phase, right, we've got planning, targeted approach, and preparing to pivot. So while you're planning, the internet is wide open. There's no reason to not dedicate a decent amount of time every week. You don't have to do this every day, but every week into kind of diving a little bit deeper into the law schools. Now, I don't mean going to blogs. That is not what I mean at all. I mean going to the school's websites, and I mean going to other legitimate resources. You can go to the ABA site, you can go to the LSAC site, you can go to, some other reputable third parties, but I don't mean blogs. Attend as many events as you can. Take all the opportunities that are available to you if you can. They are typically not very burdensome, hopefully, on your time. They shouldn't cost you anything to participate. And they can be an opportunity for you to interact and to, learn a little bit more from the law school. And make sure you're also casting a pretty wide net. Consider schools that maybe you haven't just kind of dialed in on. Maybe there are schools out there that could be a really, really good fit for you. And you just haven't stumbled into them yet. So spend a little bit of that time doing some targeted internet searches and figuring out what may be, on the table for you. So part of that targeted approach is getting familiar with things like the ABA Standard 509. This is a report every year that law schools are required to submit to the ABA, and therefore, as a result, we post the information on our website. You can also go, if you just Google that, ABA Standard 509, you can go to the link and you can look at the reports for all the law schools, all the ABA accredited law schools in the country. You can see them for every year. We've been doing this for ages, so there's many years to go back. You can also download the data into spreadsheets if you really want to look at it that way. But what it does is, one, it will give you information about the entering class profiles so that you can kind of gauge how perhaps competitive your particular application may be. It's also going to have other important information about like diversity or financial aid or scholarships or attrition, bar passage, those types of things. There's lots of good information, and schools, as I mentioned, are required to have this for you. Sometimes on a school's website, they may just call them ABA required disclosures, but it's all the same content. And then remember that just like you, schools are more than just their numbers. So even though I'm suggesting that you go and learn this additional information, you just use it as more information. Don't be put off by looking at some of this information and just immediately disqualifying yourself from candidacy. If you look at a school and perhaps your stats put you in the 25th percentile, that's okay. That means that they did admit people in that bracket. You may want to follow up with the school more directly to find out kind of what range of LSAT scores that they admitted. So just looking at the 25th median and the 75th percentile stats don't tell you the whole picture. So preparing to pivot. So, there's a lot, as we've been talking about, that kind of goes into this process. There's a lot that I think sometimes applicants gloss over in terms of the offers and don't really understand what is being offered in terms of perhaps scholarship, terms of scholarship, cost of attendance in those particular regions. Not all schools are obviously in the same areas. And so there are different costs associated with that, which therefore can mean that the different offers, you're going to really have to, you've heard the saying, read the fine print. You really have to read all of the information and really make sure you understand it very carefully. And then if you are offered admission at a school other than your first choice, that's still a great thing. I hope you will consider it and really reevaluate your goals. And if there's a potential for this other school to help you achieve your goals, I hope that you really give it its attention. Now, you may decide ultimately that it's still not the right fit for you and you want to hold out for that first choice school. But, as I mentioned before, if you're going to pass up the opportunity to go to law school, you should know why you're passing it up. And you should be very intentional about your strategy to reapply. And, you never know. Sometimes your second or your third or your fourth or, I don't know, your fifth choice law school, they may surprise you in a really, positive way. And they really may end up being a great option for you. So I always tell people better to have those options. You can close those doors if you, deem them ultimately to not be a good fit for you. But if you don't go down the pathway in the first place, then you won't even have those doors to close. Okay. So in setting up your strategy, it's really important that you are all very honest with yourselves. You should be able to take, a really objective look at your strengths and your weaknesses. Now, if you have some strengths that you want to make sure are in your application, then you can kind of plot out exactly where they're going to go. Is it going to be something you talk about in your personal statement? Is it going to be on your resume? Is it going to be something you ask a recommender to talk about? For example, let's say you are admitted into a prestigious honors program at your school and you want to make sure that it's conveyed how selective that process is. You may want to ask the recommender to mention that. But on the other side, if there are some weaknesses or perceived weaknesses, and that's a key phrase there, then think about a strategy to come up with some ways to give that contextual information. So if you maybe are a returning student and, let's say, for example, your grades from 10 years ago when you finished school were not the best, but you've gone on to lead a very successful professional career. You've had lots of leadership opportunities. You've run your own company, whatever it may be, you're going to want to give some context to the kind of student that you were then, perhaps write a GPA addendum. And you're also going to really want to make sure that the other aspects are really going to shine. And then your letters most likely are going to be professional instead of academic, right? That's kind of drawing a thread through the whole thing and making sure that it's very cohesive. There are other scenarios too that we see quite often where perhaps somebody is not a great LSAT taker, or not a great test taker. You can't just write in a statement that says, I'm not good at tests, so therefore disregard it. But if you can write, an LSAT addendum that talks about perhaps your history with standardized testing and the offset of that, which would have been hopefully your, outstanding academic achievement, to show that maybe you weren't a great standardized test taker, but you were a great student, right? That's an additional way to kind of bring some of that context together. So in order to craft those various things and provide that additional context, then you're going to need to find out which things the law schools will accept. So at Southwestern, we're pretty forgiving in terms of addenda. We allow you to submit nearly anything that you want, as long as it's appropriate. But just remember that just because something is allowed doesn't mean that you should do it. So be thoughtful, be concise, think about what's going to be, kind of the best combination of information for you to share. And I mentioned earlier, not to worry a lot about what's on blogs. I really want to underscore that. I think that's really important. I think many of us turn to resources, either online or even, relationships that we have because we want to get some feedback and we want to get some advice. And there's a place for that in this process, particularly if you know anyone who is an attorney, whether or not it's a professor or a supervisor or someone in your family. It's only going to be natural for you to want to talk to them about this process. It's also going to be important to you to want to talk to other prospective students just to kind of gauge, do you feel like you're on the same pathway that they are? But you got to take all of that with a grain of salt, because all of that will kind of get into your head. And ultimately, as I said at the top of this presentation, only you really know what's important to you. And only you will actually be sitting in that classroom for yourself and earning those grades. So at the end of the day, you're going to be the one that has to make the decision. And you're going to have to, approach it with confidence. I've seen many students, I've been doing this a really long time, and I've seen many students, choose to go somewhere else because they thought that was the quote unquote best option, whether or not it was a higher scholarship or perhaps higher ranked for something, whatever it may be. And it kind of went against the grain of what their own gut was telling them to do. And then they get to that other place and they're not happy. And, it's hard. Law school is going to be hard. And it's really hard to muster up all the energy that you need to be a successful law student if you're not really happy about your choices. So I hope all of you, won't make those same kinds of errors. And I want you to approach wherever you end up, feeling good about your decision. Okay, so success, really in anything, but we'll narrow this just to the law school application process, really is a full-time commitment. You should expect to hear from us. You should want to hear from us. We expect and want to hear from you. There's never any reason not to follow any instructions. If you're not sure about any particular instruction, please just ask. Remember that sometimes you don't reach the goal on your first try out. So I hope that isn't discouraging for any of you that, as I mentioned, don't get your offers to your first choice schools. It is not uncommon to be admitted as a reapplicant. And expect that you are going to learn things about the schools, and you may learn a little bit about yourself along the way. And that is really just kind of part of this journey. And, I hope that many of you see Southwestern as a good fit for your law school career. But if you ultimately do not, that's okay. I hope you go on to find a school where you're going to really thrive and really enjoy the experience. So I'm going to stop the screen share now, and we've got a little bit of time left for questions.